Back in about 2006 I bought my first digital single lens reflex camera, and this is it. This is the Nikon D100. It was released about 2002. It's a 6.1 megapixel CCD sensor, and although I haven't been able to find out the new price in this country at the time, in the United States it sold for $1 under $2,000, body only. I've researched a few YouTube videos on this camera, and quite frankly they are shocking. They are utterly shocking in how little modern photographers seem to know about, well, anything really, but this camera in particular. Let's have a little walk around the controls and you can see what kind of options were available for the users of this camera. I think the controls are very intuitive. We have, for exposure, we have manual exposure where you set both the shutter speed and the aperture, and the aperture you set with the front command dial, and the shutter speed you set with the rear command dial. On aperture priority, if you change the aperture with the front dial, the shutter speed changes automatically. Likewise with shutter priority, if you change the shutter speed with the rear dial, then the aperture should change as well, but then here it's just too dark. And in program, the camera works out everything for you. Also on this command dial I can change the ISO, which runs from 200 to 1600. I can change the white balance for different lighting conditions. I can change the quality of the image. This will fire in RAW, but it won't take pictures in RAW plus JPEG. So that was a slight disadvantage of this camera. This little plus allows me to change the focus points. There are only 5 focus points on this camera. If I adjust it to the center, I am simply spots focusing on the center of the dial. If I move it around, I can go from center to the 5 points. Again, on this end of the camera I can choose multiple shooting, I can choose single shot, or I can choose the self timer. If I look at the back of the camera, I have a series of buttons here which I won't go through because it will just take too long. But I've got exposure lock, I've got autofocus lock, I can bracket my flash, and this, by our standards, probably quite primitive toggle pad here would allow me to review the pictures or choose other settings from the menu. And of course I have a quite small screen on the back. The camera takes compact flash cards. This one that's in here at the moment is a 4 GB card, and on fine pictures that would allow me to take about 1,000 photographs. It will of course take a Nikon dedicated flash gun, but what I particularly like about this, although a lot of people may not appreciate it the way I do, is we have a threaded socket in the shutter release to take a traditional cable release. Look at the front of the camera. Let's take the lens off. For my focus, I can select manual focus, single focus where it focuses an object and locks on it, or continuous focus where it will change from object to object as things move around the frame. This is my lens release, and this button here is a depth of field preview. So if I want to see how much is in focus at say f11, I press this button, everything goes dark, but I get an appreciation of what actually is happening in terms of focus. I have an AF illumination light here, and of course you can see the front command dial on the camera. On the bottom of the camera I've got the tripod mount, and I insert the batteries here. Well, this isn't the original battery, this is a battery from a D200, but it works fine. So if I have a 100, a 200 or a 300 D series Nikon, they will all take the same batteries as long as it's the better battery. The D100 battery, which is black, won't work on the D200 or the D300, but their batteries will work on this camera. Autofocus is pretty slow, but it's accurate. I'm using this with a 28 to 100 AF Nikon lens. This is actually a FX lens as it comes off a film camera, but the kit lens with this is obviously designed for the crop sensor that's in the camera. It's got a pop-up flash. It's effective to about 2.5–3 meters. You can control the output of the flash gun with the controls on the back here, and basically that's it. A 6.1 megapixel camera that's nearly 20 years old. Works fine, and for most people it's a perfectly adequate tool. I keep saying this over and over again. It's not the camera that takes the picture, it's the photographer that takes the picture. Having the latest kit will not make you a brilliant photographer. If you can get pictures out of this camera, which are good, you will get pictures out of any Nikon camera. The control layout is very, very similar to later cameras. In fact, I have one here. You can see a clear family resemblance between this Nikon D100 and this Nikon D600. If you learn on Nikons, then Nikons are fairly consistent. There are differences in the menus, but that's because the cameras have been getting better over the years. That said, this is not a bad camera. I have to say though, I took it out on a job photographing a wedding when I just got the camera because I wasn't too certain about how it would perform. I took it out with my f100 film camera, and although by today's standards this would be considered a fairly sturdy camera, compared to the Nikon film offering at the time, this actually felt like a toy. A very, very, very expensive toy though. And it was beloved of many, many photographers for many years, and quite rightly so. So, the Nikon D100 from about 2002, 6.1 megapixels, an excellent little toy.